And new this morning, Honda Canada is putting its $15 billion Canadian electric vehicle plans on hold for 2 years.
Honda has announced a $15 billion investment in Ontario, building EV batteries and vehicles north of the GTA in
Alliston, Ontario. Automaker Honda, along with the Prime Minister and Ontario's Premier, have just announced a $15 billion investment.
A silent storm is sweeping through America's auto industry, and even its most resilient brands are feeling the pressure. Honda, long admired for precision, reliability, and disciplined long-term planning, now faces one of the steepest financial setbacks in its history. Company projections show profits plunging by nearly 60%, a drop that cuts deeply into its global operations and supply chains. The cause, however, is not declining demand or technological shortcomings. It is policy. President Trump's sweeping import tariffs, some reaching as high as 50%, have turned every vehicle crossing into the United States into a costly gamble. As the shockwaves move through the industry, one conclusion is becoming unavoidable. No automaker is immune to Honda's financial hit is severe. Global losses are currently estimated at $4.3 billion, with more than half directly linked to Washington's aggressive tariff strategy. Measures intended to bolster U.S. manufacturing have instead fractured supply networks across the continent. Inside Honda plant from Ohio to Alabama, production schedules are being scaled back, suppliers are missing component deliveries, and inventories are growing faster than dealerships can absorb them. Behind closed doors, executives warn that this turbulence may spread far beyond the auto sector. If a company as historically stable as Honda is struggling to absorb the shock, the rest of the automotive supply chain faces an even more uncertain future. Across the border, Canada has taken a remarkably different approach, one that turned the United States trade disruption into a strategic opportunity. As the U.S. leaned into protectionism, Ottawa recognized a rare opening to reshape the North American manufacturing landscape. What began as a defensive response to tariff threats evolved into a calculated strategy to attract multinational investment. At the center of that strategy was Honda's next major decision in mid-2024. Honda unveiled an $11 billion investment to build an expansive electric vehicle ecosystem in Ontario, the largest project in the company's Canadian history. The initiative includes a cutting-edge EV assembly plant, a dedicated battery production facility, and 2 specialized factories that will produce key battery materials in partnership with POSCO Future M and Asahi Casey Corporation. This was not a temporary workaround to avoid tariffs. It was a blueprint for restructuring Honda's entire North American footprint once completed. The Ontario complex is projected to produce about 240,000 electric vehicles annually, powered by 36 gigawatt-hours of battery capacity. Full-scale production is scheduled for 2028, marking a pivotal shift in Canada's industrial trajectory. For investors, the project signaled more than just expansion. It represented confidence. In a global economy shaken by volatile trade policies, Canada offered something increasingly rare: stability. Economists now describe this environment as a replacement ecosystem, a model that global manufacturers may rely on when seeking consistency amid policy uncertainty. The broader effects were immediate. Within months, other major automakers, Toyota, BMW, Hyundai, and others, began re-evaluating their own production strategies across North America. The logic guiding investment had shifted. Success was no longer defined by proximity to the biggest consumer market, but by the reliability of the regulatory environment surrounding that market. For many automakers, this meant looking north to Canada or south to Mexico, where long-term policy frameworks remain clearer and more predictable. Honda's decision to anchor its EV future in Ontario was no coincidence. The province sits at a strategic crossroads of continental and global trade, close enough to serve the enormous U.S. market efficiently, yet connected directly to Atlantic shipping routes and European partners. Add to that Ontario's skilled workforce, well-developed infrastructure, and abundant clean energy, and the region offered advantages few jurisdictions could match. Recognizing the scale of the opportunity, the Canadian federal government and the province jointly committed nearly $5 billion in support. Structured not as a bailout, but as a partnership enabling globally competitive production. Ottawa reinforced this commitment by introducing a suite of financial incentives, including a 10% investment tax credit for EV supply chain development and a 30% credit for clean technology initiatives. These policies gave Canada a clear competitive edge over the United States, where similar incentives under the Inflation Reduction Act remain mired in political debate. Economists describe Canada's move as a direct countermeasure, transforming America's trade uncertainty into momentum for Canadian industrial growth. The results are already reshaping the region. Ontario, once known primarily for traditional vehicle assembly, is rapidly evolving into a hub for advanced manufacturing and clean technology innovation. At the heart of this change is Honda's massive new complex in Alliston. The project is expected to generate more than 1,000 direct jobs and several thousand more across construction, logistics, materials processing, and engineering. When the facilities reach full operation, Honda's Canadian workforce could surpass 5,000 employees. This expansion is set to transform the Southern Ontario manufacturing corridor, blending long-standing industrial strengths with emerging technologies. By partnering with POSCO Future M and Asahi Kasei, Canada has also achieved something once viewed as nearly impossible: a fully localized supply chain for EV battery materials. Cathodes, separators, and other critical components will all be produced domestically. This reduces reliance on overseas suppliers and secures Canada's position within the global EV supply network. Analysts estimate that such localization could cut battery manufacturing costs by more than 20%, giving Honda and Canada a strategic advantage over both Chinese and U.S. competitors. As tariffs continue to drive up production costs in the United States, Canada is capitalizing on its natural strengths: vast mineral resources, stable policy, and abundant renewable power. The resulting shift is not temporary. It is redefining North American manufacturing for the next generation. Canada's rise as a clean energy industrial powerhouse is accelerating, driven by a unique combination of hydroelectric power and abundant deposits of lithium, nickel, and cobalt. These natural advantages are transforming the country into one of the most efficient and environmentally sustainable manufacturing zones in the world. Analysts now describe this shift as a quiet rebirth of Canadian industry, steady, strategic, and increasingly influential. As American production falters under policy-driven pressures, Canada is emerging as a stable anchor of North America's next economic era. The situation in the United States, meanwhile, is becoming more difficult to overlook. Tariffs intended to rebuild American industry are instead undermining its competitiveness. For Honda, each vehicle imported into the U.S. now carries up to $7,000 in additional costs. That financial strain has forced the company to raise prices sharply, which has in turn reduced consumer demand. By the second quarter of 2025, Honda's U.S. sales had dropped by 18%. To compensate, the company increased output from its plants in Mexico and Canada, further decreasing production inside the United States. The ripple effects have been swift. Foreign investors, long a critical engine of U.S. industrial growth, are beginning to withdraw. Foreign direct investment in American manufacturing fell nearly 30% in the first half of the year. What was originally framed as a policy to protect domestic jobs is now pushing capital and employment beyond U.S. borders. Canada, by contrast, has attracted more than $46 billion in EV-related investment since 2020, surpassing Mexico and solidifying its position as a new hub of North America's industrial expansion. The contrast between the two countries' approaches is clear. While the United States builds trade walls, Canada focuses on collaboration. One isolates, the other partners. And in a globalized economy where supply chains depend on reliability and trust, collaboration tends to produce stronger outcomes. Still, Canada's path has not been without its own challenges. In 2024, Honda announced a 2-year delay to its massive EV investment project in Ontario. CEO Toshihiro Maebe cited slower-than-expected global EV market growth as a primary factor. Beneath the announcement was a broader economic reality. Worldwide demand for electric vehicles had cooled. China's oversupply of affordable EV models had flooded global markets, driving prices down and squeezing profit margin for automakers everywhere. Honda's leadership responded by slowing its timeline rather than pushing ahead recklessly. Some critics interpreted the delay as a sign of weakness. Yet most analysts viewed it as a calculated move, a demonstration of strategic discipline. By pausing, Honda allowed itself time to refine factory plans, reinforce supply chains, and ensure production would align with genuine long-term demand. Observers called it a pause for precision, a calculated step back to strengthen the project's foundation. Although the delay temporarily dampened job growth expectations, it ultimately protected the long-term sustainability of the investment. Through all of this, a crucial lesson has emerged. Protectionism, once promoted as a path to economic independence, is revealing itself as a strategic trap. The tariffs designed to shield U.S. industry from foreign competition are instead pushing innovation and investment to other countries. As Washington continues to tighten trade restrictions, production flows naturally toward nations offering stability and predictable policy environments. The global manufacturing landscape is being reconfigured not by breakthroughs in technology or shifts in labor markets, but by confidence and trust that Canada's ascent as a manufacturing leader is not accidental. It stems from deliberate, long-term policy choices rooted in consistency, transparency, and investor certainty. While political polarization in the U.S. disrupts economic planning, Canada's steady approach has created the predictability global industries depend on. Economists now warn that if the United States continues down a path of escalating trade barriers, the shift in industrial influence may become irreversible. Companies leaving today may not return tomorrow. Trust is becoming the new currency of global supply chains. Nations that can guarantee it attract the industries of the future, while those that cannot risk fading into economic irrelevance. Amid these domestic and regional shifts, the United States has also pursued a series of bilateral economic agreements. With Japan, the focus was on securing critical minerals and rare earth elements essential for electronics and EV production. Both governments agreed to streamline permitting, expand mining cooperation, and encourage reciprocal investments to reduce dependence on China. In a symbolic gesture toward industrial openness, Toyota agreed to allow U.S.-made vehicles into its domestic distribution network and expressed willingness to explore collaborations that might help American automakers gain a foothold in Japan. For now, this remains a framework rather than an active exchange, requiring individual agreement between Toyota and prospective U.S. partners. South Korea's agreement focused largely on aerospace and high-value industrial investment.